Thank you all. My name is Haider. We have indeed incredible panelists here. We have 1 hour together, maybe less, I think 50 minutes, where we're going to navigate through this topic again about transformation. But we're going to try hard to not talk about AI, right? In all of the panels, we try not to talk about AI and talk about people. And when preparing this panel, something happened. We felt that opposing people's fatigue to organization fatigue with data was an interesting angle to pursue. So we are going to tackle this and understand, do companies have a problem with data preparation and interoperability, and how this translates into the people side. Let me give you an example. All of those companies you represent or you work for have data, right? We all know. But that data is frozen. It's like a glacier and it's not liquid. And most of the organizations that are successful with transformation, they have something in common. They created liquidity with the data. And so the data is circulating, getting augmented. And in my job, so I will just introduce myself quickly. I run a venture capital firm out of Geneva in the US, in New York. And one of the things we do when we invest in tech startups is understanding if they have the culture of creating data liquidity for themselves, but also for their industry to make it open so that they create value in the ecosystem. So before we are going to jump into the topic, I would like just to have maybe a round of intro like this. We don't have to waste too much time later. Can you just say who you are and who you work for?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sine Walker, and I'm the Director for Strategy and Transformation in our Customer Service and Supply Chain function for Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners. My key focus really is making sure that we are putting together all the strategies across supply chain to a one supply chain or a unified strategy for our supply chain. We're a company that employs 45,000 people, and we've got 21,000 of those in supply chain. So it's 50% of our business sits in supply chain. So this is a topic that's very close to my heart, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, it's an absolute honor to be on this panel as well. So looking forward to the discussions we're going to have. My name's Courtney Austin. I'm a 30-year digital marketing transformation leader. I worked all over the world. I work for a company called EasyDMark, leading their email, domain, and security deliverability programs. And looking forward to some exchanges this afternoon.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Anu Hati, Head of Program Delivery for NHS Blood and Transplant. This topic very close to my heart because I am currently running a large digital transformation program for the people. It's basically dealing with blood donation. So this topic is really close to my heart.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. So I'm Gishan. I work for NeoCloud, operator, data center operator for AI called InScale, very new company, existed only for 2 years. I've been in this HR space. I work in HR technology, nearly 20 years. So HR is always a challenge, right? You need to get people to use the HR systems. So it's really interesting topic to be part of.
Good afternoon. I'm Jean-Philippe. I'm a CIO at Expereo. And I also indeed, I'm at a sweet spot because we provide connectivity for multinational, but we mostly see ourselves as helping our customer to go through their digital transformations. But I always indeed have the privilege to have my own sandbox because obviously I'm also very focused internally in driving the transformation within Expereo. So those two aspects indeed very much around the data and transformation.
Thank you, Philippe. So I'll start with you, Courtney. So we'll jump right to it, and please interject if you disagree, agree, right? We'll have a conversation. When I've done this type of transformation in my experience, you have people excited, about the data, usually the CFOs and the financial people, they jump on the Excel spreadsheet and so on. So you have those type of people excited. And you have also people very much stressed and fatigued at seeing the reports coming to them on Monday mornings. How do you help those people actually see the value of a data-driven organization? How do you help those teams actually see the value in this?
Yeah, listen, I think it's a good place to start. And I think, what's that expression? The data doesn't lie, okay? So the data gives a particular picture. Having managed teams globally myself, I see lots of different variations of data by different regions as well. And I think as you split things out, I've often thought as you analyze the data, you've really got to look and say, where is the incremental business value on top of this, which is driving it? And I'll give you an example. So as I mentioned before, we're in the DMARC space, email deliverability. We did a research study actually in South Africa talking about actually how organizations weren't adopting the right DMARC protocol. And the data was actually used then by a minister in the South African government to actually try and drive change across different organizations. And that really got buy-in for us, both internally and externally as well. And so where you can see data being a change driver, that's where you really get the support across all levels of management as well. That's my thought.
Anyone wants to react to
If I can just maybe add a little bit to that. I think data becomes more adapted when it brings in clarity. If people see that we're using it to create clarity, we're using it to bring certainty, like you were saying, rather than it being used for scrutiny. The minute we step away from it being used for scrutiny, people will be interested in using more data for what they do on a daily basis.
That's actually a perfect segue for you, Sane. Yeah, for you, because when we prepared this, we were also talking about data should create the right circle for better decision. But those decisions can become signals and noise. How do you do that mitigation so that you don't overload, the people?
Absolutely. I like that you mentioned that, that clarity, you have to know what problem you're trying to solve, especially for the front line. For us, when we're dealing with the front line, we need to empower them. We can't give them lots of sets of data and expect them to analyze it. The front line is really concerned about solving the problems they have, whether they're on the line, whether on the shop floor, and they need to know what decisions they need to take based on the data that they're seeing now. And where data can fall short is when you're sending too much information with no clear goals, and you're expecting that the front line can action. So we need to be clear what KPIs or what data sets are for management, what KPIs and what data sets are meant for the front line. And what is important for us from a customer service supply chain strategy in CCP is that because the front line are at our core of our business, when we make decisions about what data becomes available, we start with that. What's the value that we want to unlock? What data do we need to prioritize for them? And what are the real operating decisions that our teams can make on the shop floor without having management intervene into that? And also, one of the things that we tend to protect against is digitalization outpacing capacity, because it's good to have lots of data capability. If you don't have the capability, you have data and no one can interpret it. So it's making sure that the pace that you're moving with your digitalization, your data and availability of all of that, you're also upskilling and creating the capability in the front line to be able to match that. And then also anchoring KPIs and legacy systems is a risk, because you could have lots of KPIs being readily available to the front line, but if it's still anchored to something that was relevant 10 years ago, it doesn't help the front line in any way. And then I guess my last point would be you need to make sure that your frontline teams feel like they are not left to interpret complexity with your data. There needs to be a clear separation. What's the front line's role and what's management's role in the KPIs?
Jean-Philippe, you want to react?
Well, because I always say, tell me how you're going to measure, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. But I think we talk a lot about data, and I think it's good to think that data is about, now more than ever, understanding behavior much more than controlling people. And I think that's the only signal that we should filter to give back to the front.
And I can give you an example. One sales rep one day after a CRM implementation told me, you know what it means for me? It means checking a lot of boxes on Sunday night for my sales meeting on Monday. That was the reflection of this data project for him. So we sometimes forget that we are implementing monsters, for the day-to-day people. So your comment on the front line is spot on. Let's switch maybe to you, Gisan, and because you work in HR as well. So usually we want the best KPI ever is a change of behavior, right? So this is the best feedback loop. You induce something, you have a feedback loop. What types of metrics, basically for yourself, you find when you say, okay, now we have adopted a new phase of the program? Can you share a bit from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a funny question, right? So I'm the KPI guy, right? So I'm an analytics person. But I think the adoption and the user experience is not a KPI, it's a feeling.
Keep your mic.
How you feel, it's how you would use the system. Right, in HR, how many of you have HR systems like used for performance management, expenses? How many of you have? Literally all. Do you have a choice not to use it? Right, so if you look at the usage, it's always 100%, always green. But the reality is, how many of you felt after finishing it, wow, that was good, right? So I see the technology is the enabler in HR, right? Process is the driver, and the user is the champion, right? You really have to feel, you finish something, wow, that was good, it was simple, right? When you feel confident, you use more. So that's what we try to aim for in HR, right? Try to get feedback. We'll look at things like how many people started the goal setting process and didn't finish it, fall off the process. Some people actually takes 3 months, 4 months, and some people never finish it because it's not clear what to do, right? The performance management is a really good one. Another one is learning, right? We look at how many people have not actually started the course but not completed, right? This is not the traditional metrics, but slightly different. So I think it's really measuring how people feel, right? Just after a process is what I think we should be looking at.
You want to react?
Yeah, I just want to add to that. You know, context, when we consider metrics, context is very important. Just for example, we might be looking at green dashboards, but that green dashboards could be hiding a lot of frustrating workarounds. So just in a customer experience journey. So context is very important, and we always need to consider our people and not just data.
I'll give you another example for a pharma company I cannot name, obviously. But they were super excited in the corporate communication teams because they said, everyone loves us on social media, right? Everyone was excited because, you know, those sentiment tracks, right? The positivity. But in reality, they were talked maybe 0.1% out of the social media space. So no one was really seeing that communication. And context was everything. Without that particular share of voice data, you could actually induce, you know, something totally different in the room. And actually, it was not super exciting as a KPI. You want to interject?
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, and I totally agree with your point earlier on, because sort of as a marketing leader, I've managed lots of teams, all sorts of companies all over the world. You can't manage what you can't measure. And from my smear as a marketing leader, it's never been better for us to have the data tools available to actually provide context. So marketing's not seen as a sort of fluffy cloud. Actually, we're driving real bottom line revenue for the business and holding folks accountable. And I think where we have data coming in, where it's seen as a positive change driver, I think that's a really good thing. And again, we're in a very fortunate position at the moment.
Absolutely. So just to add it, so content is the king, right? We say that. So the content is the data. But to operate, you have to have a kingdom. So the context, as you said, is actually what makes the data make sense. Yep.
So let's navigate now to another symptom of the organization who are trying to be data-driven. And they are usually launching a lot of those programs that fail short. Maybe they have a death by pilot effect. They launch many pilots and they never scale. And I want to talk to you now, because in the NHS, obviously, you've seen a lot of pilots and a lot of transformation. My question to you is, where do you find the energy for the organization so that it doesn't feel like an infinite transformation program? Where can we avoid the fatigue, you know, by the people who say, you know, we are constantly changing, this is the new normal, new is not new anymore? How can you deal with this?
I think one of the key things is for us to think about transformation as a capability growth and not just another phase of a project and not just another program. We've got to think about positioning it that way to the people, to say, when I'm delivering something, I'm delivering capability. And when I've delivered something else, I have delivered growth of that capability. Mm-hmm. So you celebrate not the milestones of the programs, but more about lived improvements. Like, I have implemented this and this is what it's improved, and you celebrate that. So people don't really burn out with change. They burn out by never finishing. So you position yourself to say, we have delivered this improvement now, we've finished this, now let's move on to the next phase. So I'm running a program that's now been running for 5 years. We're moving to the 6th year. I have some of my partners sat right at the back of the room today as well. And I think it's about as much about people as it is about technology. Technology is an enabler. People are the real thing.
Who wants to reckon? Sunny?
I'll just add a bit on that. I think a lot of the times when you see transformation fatigue is when there's transformation that's unclear and people are just constantly in this mode of, oh, we need to change, but they don't actually know what they're changing to. So I don't think the issue tends to become with constant transformation. It's about having that clarity. What is this transformation? What is it going to improve? And then what is next after that? And transformation, I think, for me, creates an environment where innovation lives as well. Because if you have an environment that's open for transformation, you have an engaged group of people that are always keen to also find ways to continually improve what they're doing. And for us, from a supply chain perspective as well, continuous improvement is something that's embedded in supply chain. If you're not looking to improve all the time, you are going to lose efficiency, you're not going to be productive, and that will hurt your profit margins. So it's really important to make sure that the culture you create within your frontline teams, within even your management and beyond, is that we need to be clear on what changes are we making and what problems are they solving, what value they're adding, and you have an environment that allows transformation.
You want to add something, Jean-Philippe?
Well, I think when we talk about transformation, there's an idea of a project that will finish at one point. You will be transformed and it's done. And I think maybe we need to shift indeed a little bit the way we look at it, that driven mostly by technology now, it's a never-ending transformation because it will be a continuous evolution.
Yeah, and in a panel this morning we said we transform into media company with social media. Now with AI we're going to transform into deep tech companies, and that transformation is going to continue, right? It's a constant, and I like what you said, it's a culture thing. Yeah. So we have responsibility as leaders to induce that culture. So it's coming from the top, not just necessarily hiring the new kid around the block who gets it, right? So, okay, let's go to you, Jean-Philippe. So we are talking about being future-proof, kind of inducing a culture of always being ready for what's coming next. So how do you design the data structure or the architecture so that we are already ready for the future and not breaking and building, which we see sometimes, that inducing fatigue. Sometimes we are buying a CRM or an ERP for 5 years and you see the new CIO or CFO is breaking the walls and bringing something new. How to create an architecture that's future-proof? That's my question.
I mean, I think there's been a lot of elements that have been talked about because, I mean, we say we cannot talk about AI too much when it talks to technology, so I'm not going to dwell too much on this. We say it's not about technology, it's about people. But I think indeed that's maybe the segue to say, maybe we need to shift the way we look at this. It's acknowledging maybe that it's not about what technology will help us to transform or what architecture will help us to transform, but acknowledge that it is the technology now that drives a lot of the changes that we see, and that it will probably never stop. That we will be constantly and even accelerating the way and the speed at which we change. I mean, obviously, we can talk about many technology when it comes to data. Obviously, Expereo is very focused on the network, and our CDO yesterday tried to make the point that we see still that connectivity at the end of the day, whatever you talk about data, about AI, about transformation, the single element from a technology point of view is still the connectivity, and that we see that from a connectivity point of view, where before it was seen as a pipe or like a commodity, we think now that much more bringing the flexibility, the scalability, and the observability and the sovereignty for your data within the fiber of your network is what allows you to start designing guardrails. I think we talked about control rather than being top-down and controlling the transformation. We think that once you've set those guardrails and you have some control about your data and your transfer, you can start building sandboxes. And we think that sandboxes is like a toddler that you put in a sandbox. You don't tell him what he can or cannot do. The worst he will do is to eat some sand, and hopefully it'll be a lesson. And I think it's the same for those organizations, is enabling the organization to play around with those new technology, bring back the domain experts to experiment with it. But because we talk about data, I think we rebranded now because we talk about observability. And observability is about capturing the snippet of data that tells us about behavior.
Yep.
And that's the architecture that I think needs to be put in place, is being able to get those signals, and that's where we'll drive the experiments and the transformation and make everyone engage in that transformation.
I get that you're basically systemic approach where also people can interject their knowledge for the process and help design the ecosystem, right? You wanted to add something?
I think that's an excellent point you've raised there, actually. I think, I've been in technology for like 40 years, so I've seen a lot of transformations. And actually, if you look at, say, some examples we see there, how can the world's largest taxi cab company actually not own a taxi? How can blockbuster video be displayed so quickly with things like Netflix, Amazon Prime, etc.? How are you predicting the future to say, what do our customers need? And what are those data signals telling you? And how are you getting buy-in from the board to look at those signals to actually make sure your product and your market is relevant as well? So there's some of those key drivers. But yeah, I love your point there. Sorry, I think you had a question.
No worries. I was just going to say, there's so much advancement happening in technology on a daily basis. Again, AI, not talking about it here, but there is so much happening. So maybe it's not possible for us to future-proof. Maybe it is about preparing for that change and being ready to pivot when needed, or being ready to recover from that change when it happens, and empowering our people where needed.
That's good.
Just going to add one point. I had a question for everyone. Is transformation, what do you think is a choice? It's given, right? It happens every day. Raise your hand. Any of your companies not going through any transformation? And raise your hand if you are yourself or the job is not going through the transformation. So I think it's not a choice anymore, right? It's the way of life. I think we need to adopt that.
I think the answer to that is BlackBerry.
Yeah. So we have time for questions. So if you want to address the panel, ask a question, we have a few minutes to answer it. Who wants to jump?
Hi. First of all, thank you so much, Haider, for this amazing panel and all the panelists as well. I'm Babita Evans-Kumar from a startup in predictive and preventative healthcare. The question I have actually is for you, Anupama. In terms of the transformation that you're driving with NHS Blood and Transplant, what are the biggest people-centric challenges you have overcome to accelerate the transformation?
I think one of the key things is all of us as people are used to certain ways of doing things, certain ways of, we're used to our processes. It's about being able to bring people to stop thinking about, this is the way I've always done it, to, yes, I'm open to change, yes, I'm open to doing things differently, was our biggest success, I would say. I don't want to go into too much of software development and processes, but it's about people being used to doing waterfall and then us transforming them to being more agile, especially in healthcare, because everybody's worried about being agile in healthcare because of patient safety. We've got to think about how can we do it more safely. Yes, we've got to follow agile, but being agile in the true sense of the meaning of the word agile, rather than following it as a methodology.
So ways of working is the biggest thing that you saw, moving from traditional to agile ways of working.
I would say, because from HR point of view, you have to meet the people where they are, right? You can't just roll out and say, here's the tool, everybody use it. It's not the case, right? We were rolling out AI to say this, but to our HR leadership team. We set up one-to-one with each HR leader. Some of them are like super users. Some of them have never done a single prompt. This is a long time ago, right? About a couple of years ago. So meeting the people where they are actually helps them to build their confidence. Then try to do a vanilla program like, here we go, this is the campaign, you run it, and it's going to expecting it to be successful.
And I think I like what you've just said. It goes back to capability, right? You have to make sure that as you're going through change, you're building capability with the change. You can't wait to have the change and then go, oh, oops, we need 2 years to get everyone ready to use this tool or embrace it. So capability is a big part of it.
Thank you so much. Ways of working, meeting people where they need to be, and having the right capability. Thank you so much.
Any other question?
Yeah, my question to all the panel. We're discussing here one side of the question is like data-driven transformation within the company, using company data. From another standpoint, we have a lot of vendors who are already ideating, proposing you different solutions, how to gather your data, track it, systemize it, and everything. And that I see like in the future we might be have a lot of vendors being really in trouble because those companies that are innovating are actually track data with inside systematically, basically do it in-house. So does that mean, do you see in future that those vendors who are more thinking about data gathering from the market will have like better opportunity and ability to survive than those vendors who are paying attention at gathering data within the companies and doing transformation for internal processes within the companies?
I mean, we touched upon it indeed about data sovereignty, but indeed, if all your data are running in another country and then you have no guarantee on how those data are being used, obviously they can be used to gain an advantage. And I think that's it needs to be embedded in understanding where your data are, even before you understand what you're going to do with it.
And then just to maybe to add to that as well, what's that old proverb? You know, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Okay, so look at a sample size of data over a period of time. Don't make a knee-jerk reaction based on something you've seen over a few days or weeks or what have you. So those sort of changes are important. The case I gave before with those examples, who saw web services coming? Some people didn't. Others who did got a competitive advantage, but it took a lot of data to analyze that.
Just a quick point from my end. I think context, again, what we spoke about earlier is very important. And if your data is able to shorten that distance between insight and action, that data becomes valuable. And that's when context becomes all the more important.
Hi, my name is Pradeep, and I've been doing data-driven transformation for the last 20 years in different forms. You know, API is another way to access data as well. One of the key transformations I was involved in was sort of government-ish project. I don't want to share the names and the details. Biggest challenge over there was people holding on to the information about data. It's still seen as something valuable within teams. They don't want to let go of it without knowing their role in the organization in future, how they can leverage from it. And they were very averse to any data governance or governance-related tools that we wanted to bring in, like data discovery platforms that could, you know, creep through all sorts of data and, you know, build a map out of it. Now, with AI coming out, things make it more difficult for these people trying to hold on to data. What are you seeing any trend in this? Like any changes in the trend? Are people more open now, given AI is eventually going to take over in some form or shape? What's your thinking? What do you feel the trend is at the moment?
That's a question for you.
Yeah, so from HR, you see the regulators also coming in, right? If you look at gender pay transparency coming into effect next year, right? And the other, the CSRD perspective, you know, corporate responsibility reporting. Earlier, it was used to be only for finance, right, or regulatory requirement. I think things opening up, but clever organization, I would say, won't sit don't put the data in a box and keep it for only set of people. The real value when you mix things together, right? So if you look at any good meal, right, you have to have the right mix of ingredients, right? The same for HR or for any other. You have finance data, you have HR data, you have supply chain data, you have transformation data, behavioral data. If you mix them together, you get the best out of it. So I would say it's changing. Progressive companies definitely opening things up, right? But I think it's going to change with AI a lot as well, because you can't have good AI without good information. If they sit in silos, it's not going to work.
That will be, unfortunately, the final word of that panel. Thank you so much for preparing this and give them a round of applause, because they really try to give you the much possible in less than an hour. And yeah, so enjoy the rest of the show, and thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.